Hello everyone, I'm Chris, and this is everything you need to know before watching Scream 6, releasing March 10th. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more from us, then make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. Back in 1996, Wes Craven, 2 years after wrapping up another iconic horror franchise, A Nightmare on Elm Street, created one of the most impactful horror films of all time in Scream, which, thanks to the incredible use of humor and how well it pokes fun at the genre's established tropes, completely revitalized the slasher subgenre, and its influence can be seen in various films released since, including the I Know What You Did Last Summer franchise, the later films in the Chucky franchise, and the Scary Movie franchise, just to name a few. Scream's success also quickly spawned multiple sequels, with Scream 2 releasing less than a year after the first, and Scream 3 releasing about 3 years after that, until the franchise took a break for the next 11 years before the release of Scream 4, which was then followed by Scream 2022, another 11 years later. And now, in just a few days, the franchise will be releasing its 6th film, Scream 6, on March 10th. So before the new movie, we're going to take a look back at everything that's taken place throughout the franchise so far. But before we get started, make sure if you haven't already to go watch Screams 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is also listed in the description so you can enjoy them for yourself. To begin, we're introduced to a Woodsboro High School student named Casey Becker in 1996, as she prepares to watch a scary movie with and awaits the arrival of her boyfriend Steve Orth, until she receives a phone call from a random number, which the caller claims was an accident, but he still continues to call and try to flirt with her. The man on the other end quickly shifts from sexy to creepy though, as he reveals that he's outside watching her and also has her boyfriend tied up on the patio, but he claims she can save Steve if she's able to answer one horror-related question correctly. Who was the killer in the original Friday the 13th? She unfortunately answers incorrectly though, claiming it was Jason Voorhees, when in the original it was actually Jason's mother Pamela Voorhees, so Steve's subsequently killed. The caller then launches a chair through the patio door and enters the house, but Casey's able to escape through a window and thwart their attack as she runs towards her parents' car approaching the home, but before she can call out for help, she's stabbed through the chest by Ghostface, who then leaves her hung up in a tree with her inside spilling out to be found by her parents. Following this, we're then introduced to another Woodsboro student named Sydney Prescott, as she's surprised at her home by her boyfriend Billy Loomis, who shows up at and sneaks in through her bedroom window, before nearly being caught by her father Neil, who we learn is leaving for a business trip the next morning. The reason Billy's come over though is to discuss his and Sydney's relationship, particularly the sexual aspects of it, since the two have yet to have sex. But she's still not ready for that, largely due to the trauma she endured over the last year, as almost a year ago to the day, she found her mother Maureen dead in her bedroom after being presumably raped and stabbed by their neighbor Cotton Reary, who Sydney believes she saw leaving that night through her mother's bedroom window. Maureen's murder was then covered by reporter Gail Weathers, who also wrote a book about it, and in her book, she explained Cotton's side of the story, who admitted to being Maureen's paramour and to having sex with her the night she was found dead, but claimed he had already left the home prior to the time of the murder. But this didn't do much to exonerate him, and he's since been sent to prison. Gail's now back in town though, to cover the murders of Casey and Steve, much to the displeasure of Sydney, who's informed of what happened by her best friend Tatum Riley, whose brother Deputy Dwight Riley, aka Dewey, joins the two at their school to look over the case with Sheriff Burke. Here we also meet a few of Sydney's other friends, including Tatum's boyfriend Stu Macher, and a huge movie nerd, particularly for horror movies, Randy Meeks. And the two act pretty insensitive towards everything going on, which makes Sydney uncomfortable, so she heads home and takes a nap while she waits for Tatum to come over. A few hours later though, she's woken up by a call from Ghostface, who subsequently enters the house and attacks her, but she's fortunately able to avoid them and run up to her room, where she manages to contact a 911 operator, so they're forced to run off. Immediately following their exit, Sydney's then met at her window once again by Billy, who she, although relieved to see him after, soon becomes suspicious of after a cell phone falls out of his pocket. So she has him arrested and he's taken to the police station for questioning, where Sydney also agrees to head with Dewey so he can get her side of what happened before she heads home with him and Tatum. But as they go to leave, Sydney's approached by Gail Weathers, hoping to get the inside scoop, but she instead receives a punch to the face from a flustered and frustrated Sydney, who things then continue to get even more complicated for later that night, when while at Tatum and Dewey's house, she receives another call from Ghostface, proving that Billy's actually innocent. And this is further proven when his cellular bill comes back clean, meaning he wasn't the one who called her earlier. He's understandably pissed that his girlfriend accused him of being a psychopathic killer, but still seems even more concerned with her refusal to get intimate with him, and he suggests it's time she get over her mother's death, which really upsets her and she storms off. So with things continuing to get more and more tense, Stu decides to throw a party for everyone to cool off, and Sydney, after some persuading from Tatum, agrees to attend. So Dewey escorts her and Tatum to the home, which he's then met outside of by Gail, who'd begun flirting with him earlier in hopes that he'd feed her some information on the case, and continues to flirt with him now so he can lead her into the party. and once inside the home, she plants a camera just above the TV in case Ghostface decides to show up, so she can be the first to cover the story of their capture. And it isn't too long before Ghostface makes an appearance at the party, as while Tatum heads down to the garage to grab some beers, she's locked inside with the masked killer, who promptly slashes her arm, but she's able to thwart any further attack by launching some beer bottles at them, before attempting to crawl out through the garage's pet door, but she unfortunately gets stuck and is ultimately killed after being crushed against the roof of the garage. Back upstairs though, the guests have begun heading home, since the town's been given a 9 p.m. curfew, and as Sydney waits to leave with Tatum, she's met by Billy, who's come to apologize for what he said, and so Sydney does as well, and agrees that it's time she stopped allowing her mother's death, or who her mother was, affect her current life, and she decides to finally have sex with Billy. While they're getting it on, Gail, now back in her news van, watching the live feed with her cameraman Kenny, is once again met by Dewey, who just gotten a report of a car in the bushes down the road, so he asks if Gail would want to join him in checking it out, and she agrees. As they're walking to its location though, the drunk kids from Stu's party come speeding down the street, forcing the two to jump out of the way, resulting in Dewey landing on top of Gail, and it looks like Gail's actually begun becoming infatuated by Dewey, as she leans in and gives him a kiss before they then spot the car they were looking for, and it turns out to be that of Sydney's father Neil. So now believing him to be Ghostface, they rush back to the house, where we see Ghostface once again make an appearance, as he shows up just after Billy and Sydney finish getting it on to stab Billy in the stomach multiple times before chasing after Sid, who manages to thwart their attack and escape through a window. So Ghostface then turns their attention to the only person still at the party, Randy, while Sydney runs over to Gail's news van and begs Kenny for help, who's just now seeing Ghostface appear behind Randy, since their feed has a 30-second delay. So he goes to head inside and help him, but Ghostface heard Sydney's screams, so instead of attacking Randy, they now suddenly show up to slash Kenny's throat and continue their chase after her. Dewey and Gail show up shortly after this, with Dewey heading inside the house and Gail back into her van, on top of which she sees Kenny's dead body as she tries to drive off, before nearly running over Sydney in the middle of the road, which causes her to veer off and crash into a tree, before Sydney then sees Dewey exit the home with a knife in his back, courtesy of Ghostface, who she attempts to hide from in Dewey's car. But they're quickly able to enter since they've taken his keys, but she's once again able to thwart them and rushes towards the house. Outside of which she's met by Randy and Stu, each blaming one another of being Ghostface, so she locks them both out. Also still inside is a not yet dead Billy, who comes tumbling down the stairs, and he convinces Sydney to give him the gun so he can protect her, before then allowing Randy inside, who he promptly shoots in the shoulder, revealing him to be Ghostface. And it turns out he's not the only one, as it's revealed he'd actually been working with Stu.
Surprise, Sydney.
With their identities finally revealed, they explain that, along with their recent killing spree, they were also responsible for the murder of Sydney's mother, who it turns out Billy's father had been having an affair with, resulting in his mother abandoning him. So he had Stu, who seems to just enjoy killing, join him in killing her, and now on the 1-year anniversary of her death, they plan to kill Sid as well, and pin it on her father, who they then also plan on killing. In order to make themselves appear as if they've been left for dead though, Billy and Stu have to take turns stabbing one another, which Billy gets a little carried away with.
Ah, but Billy, would you alright? I can't take anymore. I'm feeling a little woozy here.
They then go to finally kill the remaining Prescotts, but before they can, they're met by Gail, who'd managed to get hold of their gun, but she's unable to fire it since the safety's on, and Billy's able to knock her out. Before he can kill Gail though, they're forced to shift their attention back to Sydney, who along with her father are nowhere to be found, and they then receive a call from her, who reveals she's called the cops on them, completely foiling their plans. Still, Billy looks to finish the job while Stu continues to bleed out, and the former is attacked as a result by Sid, who comes bursting out of the closet wearing the Ghostface costume and knocks him out, which prompts Stu to rush towards her, but she manages to break a vase over and drop a TV on his head, which presumably kills him. Billy's still alive though, so he tackles her to the ground and prepares to stab her, but she's fortunately saved by Gail, who's once again gained possession of his gun, and this time she's able to shoot him in the chest with it, before the two women are then joined by Randy, who'd survived the gunshot he took earlier. And Sydney then puts Billy down for good, firing a shot straight through his skull. As the morning approaches, police officers and ambulances arrive at the home, one of which takes a wounded but still alive Dewey back to the hospital, while Gail gives an exclusive eyewitness account of the night's events. Gail later also writes a book about what took place, titled The Woodsboro Murders, and in 1998, a film called Stab is created based on it, which turns out to be an instant hit. During its opening weekend though, a new Ghostface shows up in town, with them killing a couple in attendance named Phil Stevens and Maureen Evans, with the former being stabbed in the head while in the bathroom before before the latter is then stabbed to death in the theater. Back to Sydney Prescott though, who's now a freshman at Windsor College, as she, along with her roommate Hallie McDaniel, learns of the recent Ghostface murders, which have once again prompted the arrival of Gale Weathers in pursuit of another story. On campus, we also meet the rest of Sydney's new group of friends, which still includes Randy, as well as her new boyfriend, Derek Feldman, and his best friend, Mickey Altieri. Sydney's also soon reunited with Dewey, who came as soon as he heard about what happened to check on her. And following their discussion, she's then approached by Gale, who's brought Cotton Weary along with her, hoping to be the first to get an exclusive interview between the two since Sid falsely accused him for murder. But this proves to be too much for Sydney and prompts her to once again punch Gale in the face. Gale's then made to feel worse when she reunites with Dewey, who calls her out for the negative comments she wrote about him in her book, in which she described him as inexperienced. So she attempts to apologize, but he refuses to accept it. We then jump ahead to later that night, while Sydney and her friends attend a sorority mixer, but the party's brought to an impromptu end after the kids learn that one of their classmates, Cece Cooper, was killed while alone at her sorority house by the new Ghostface. Before Sid can head back to her dorm though, she's also attacked at the now empty party house by Ghostface, who she's fortunately able to avoid and escape from through the back, where she meets back up with Derek, who rushes inside to track down her attacker, but ends up slashed in the forearm for his efforts while the killer escapes. Ghostface willingly sparing Derek doesn't sit right with Sydney though, nor Dewey, and she begins to become suspicious that he may actually be the killer. So she tries to break up with him, but in response, he sings her a song in front of everyone at lunch, and to regain her trust, gives her his fraternity letters, which Mickey and Hallie say is a big frat faux pas. Dewey, meanwhile, is now working with Randy and Gale to figure out who the killer could be, which Randy tries to do by breaking down the usual tropes in horror movies. Before his ideas can pan out though, the trio gets a call from Ghostface, who claims they're currently watching them, so they split up to try and find where the caller could be hiding. But this turns out to be a bad idea, as it leaves Randy all alone to be snatched into a van and repeatedly stabbed to death by the masked killer, with Gale, Dewey, and Gale's new cameraman Joel only finding his body after the fact, and this actually prompts Joel to leave town. Immediately following Randy's death, Sydney then receives a threat on her computer in the library from what appears to be Ghostface, so the two detectives keeping an eye on her, officers Andrews and Richards, search throughout the library to see who might have sent it. And as they do that, Sydney's approached by Cotton Weary, who's still frustrated about being falsely accused, but believes she can make things right if she agrees to have a talk show sit down with him and TV broadcast journalist Diane Sawyer, as he feels he deserves some good exposure after his year in prison, as well as the paycheck that would come with it. But she declines his offer, which makes him even more aggravated, and he starts acting a bit suspicious, so the two officers end up arresting him. He's let out shortly after though, since they don't have anything on him, while Sydney and Hallie are taken somewhere safe by Andrews and Richards. So with there still being no clear answer as to who this new Ghostface is, Dewey and Gale head to the school's film lecture hall to take a look at some of Joel's footage in hopes they can spot the killer somewhere, but their investigating is put on hold when the two get back to flirting and subsequently start getting it on the stage. That's quickly interrupted as well though, after another monitor begins playing live footage of them, which they see is being recorded by Ghostface from above. So Dewey rushes towards them, but by the time he gets upstairs, Ghostface has made it downstairs and behind Gale, who they chase throughout the building until she manages to lock herself inside a soundproof booth. Dewey soon also ends up in the booth beside her, but he's unable to get her attention, and is only spotted after Ghostface appears behind and stabs him in the back before vanishing. So Gale then attempts to make a run for it, but as she does, she bumps into a bloody Cotton, bringing her to believe he's the killer. So she runs outside and snatches the phone from a fellow reporter, Debbie Salt, who'd arrived to interview Gale multiple times earlier, and Gale calls an operator to inform them that Cotton is Ghostface. Sydney and Hallie, meanwhile, are in the middle of being transported to a secure location when, while stopped at a red light, the two officers are attacked by Ghostface, with Andrews having his throat slashed before Richards is beaten and rammed into with their own vehicle. Hallie's then the next to go, with the killer popping up behind and stabbing her in the chest as she and Sydney attempted to escape. But Sydney's still able to run back to campus and into the theater, where she finds Derek tied up on stage. Ghostface then enters as well and reveals himself to be Mickey, who promptly shoots Derek in the chest before explaining why he's done what he's done, as he actually plans to get caught for all of this so he can blame it on the movies and get famous off the trial. He did have a partner in crime though, who reveals himself to be Debbie Salt, who enters holding Gale at gunpoint, and who Sydney realizes is actually Billy's mom, Mrs. Loomis. Mrs. Loomis isn't completely behind Mickey's plan to blame it on the movies though, and begins setting into motion her own plan to blame it all on Mickey, by shooting him in the chest, and as he dies, he fires off a shot that ends up hitting Gale in the stomach and sending her falling off the stage. Mrs. Loomis and Sydney then engage in a bit of a scuffle until Cotton Weary shows up, now in possession of Mickey's gun, so Mrs. Loomis attempts to convince him to let her kill Sydney, pointing out how she ruined his life, which he doesn't agree with, but he once again brings up that Diane Sawyer interview, which Sidney now agrees to do, so he shoots Mrs. Loomis in the throat, killing her, and Sidney, for good measure, then shoots her lifeless body in the head. Along with Cotton and Sidney, we see Gale and Dewey also manage to survive the night, with Gale now joining Dewey on his trip to the hospital, while Sidney's surrounded by reporters, all of which she promptly points in Cotton's direction so he can receive all the exposure he desires. 2 years on from Mickey and Mrs. Loomis's murder spree, we see Cotton's now gained all the fame and fortune he'd been seeking, with him even having his own daytime talk show, 100% Cotton. But his glamorous lifestyle is soon interrupted when he receives a phone call from yet another new Ghostface, who threatens to kill his girlfriend Christine if he doesn't tell them where Sidney Prescott is. But he decides against telling them, so while he races through traffic, they begin their attack on Christine, who they're able to trick using their voice changer and make believe they're Cotton before chasing after her. So when Cotton does eventually arrive home, she believes he's the one trying to kill her, so she whacks him over the head with a golf club, leaving herself open to a stab through the back from Ghostface, who then stabs Cotton through the chest, killing him as well. At the scene of the crime, the killer also leaves a photograph, which Detective Mark Kincaid of the LAPD brings to Gale Weathers in hopes that she can identify who's in it, and she recognizes them to be a young Maureen Prescott. Also, Cotton had just recently filmed a cameo for the third installment in the Stab film franchise, so the police are now looking into the film's production for any clues of who could have killed him. And this bad publicity worries Sunrise Studios, who begin to reconsider releasing the film, which frustrates the film's director Roman Bridger and producer John Milton. On the set, we also meet back up with Dewey, who's there working as a technical advisor, as well as a sort of assistant slash maybe boyfriend for actress Jennifer Jolie, who's playing the part of Gale in the film. Although Dewey and Gale did begin dating following what took place at Windsor College, we learned that not too long after, they ended up going their separate ways, with Gale explaining how she just couldn't live in Woodsboro forever like he wanted to. But despite the breakup, they do still seem to share feelings for one another. They try to push those feelings away for now though, as they once again begin working together to catch Ghostface after learning they'd killed another Stab 3 cast member, Sarah Darling, which results in the film being officially shut down. And at the scene of the crime, Kincaid discovers another photo of Sidney's mother, which Gale and Dewey later realized was taken in the back lot of Sunrise Studios in the 70s. Before they can act on this newfound information though, Ghostface strikes a third time, with him killing both Jennifer's bodyguard, Stephen Stone, and the actor playing Dewey in the film, Tom Prince, who was hanging out with Jennifer, Dewey, and a fellow cast member, Angelina Tyler, at Jennifer's home, before being blown up along with it. And at the scene of his death, the killer leaves another photo of Maureen, this time with a note on the back claiming they killed her. With Sidney's mother right at the center of everything that's taken place, Sidney finally decides to come out of isolation and reunite with Gale and Dewey, to potentially catch whoever's behind all of this. So to start, she has Dewey take her to the set of Stab 3, and while she takes a look around, Gale, reluctantly with the help of Jennifer, makes her way into Sunrise Studios archives, where they discover that Maureen had actually worked under the stage name Rena Reynolds back in the 70s, and acted in 3 films, each produced by John Milton. Sidney, meanwhile, makes her way to the set of her house in Woodsboro, where upon entering, she's promptly attacked by Ghostface. Fortunately though, she's able to avoid them for the most part, and escape to Dewey and Kincaid, the latter of whom transports her back to the precinct, while Dewey joins Gale and Jennifer to confront Milton in his office, and after some interrogating, they get him to reveal that during Maureen's time as an actress, she would attend some of Milton's parties at his mansion so she could, as Milton explains, meet men that could get her parts if she made the right impression.
Nothing happened to her that she didn't invite in one way or another, no matter what she said afterwards.
So the trio then begin heading back to the precinct to tell Sidney and Kincaid what they've learned, but their planned route is soon changed after Dewey receives a call from who he thinks is Sidney, telling him to meet her at John Milton's mansion for Roman Bridger's birthday party, claiming she was invited by Milton so he could give her some new information about her mother. After waiting at the party for a while though, Dewey and Gale start to get worried, so they call back the number Sid had called them from, and quickly learn that it actually wasn't her that called them, but rather Ghostface, whose phone, costume, and voice changer they find within a closet inside the home.
Dewey's got our voices.
So Gale and Dewey go to round up the other party attendees, Roman, Angelina, Jennifer, and another Stab 3 cast member, Tyson Fox, who had split up to take a look around the mansion earlier, but unfortunately, Ghostface catches up to them first, with Gale finding a seemingly dead Roman, before Angelina, Tyson, and Jennifer are each killed as well. Ghostface then manages to knock Dewey out and capture Gale before then calling up Sidney, and threatening to kill her friends if she doesn't come to Milton's mansion alone. And so she does, and once there, she's promptly kicked to the ground, but to the killer's surprise, she'd brought a gun along with her. which she fires into their chest multiple times. As she goes to untie Gale and Dewey though, Ghostface shockingly vanishes just moments before Kincaid then arrives in search of Sidney, but he's quickly taken out of the equation when the killer pops up again and stabs him in the shoulder, before then chasing Sid into Milton's hidden screening room, where they finally reveal themselves to be Roman Bridger, who it turns out is Sidney's biological brother, born as a result of their mother being raped by Milton and his buddies. He explains that all his life, he searched for his mother and eventually found her 4 years ago, but Maureen refused to take him in, claiming he was Rena Reynolds' son and not hers. So he put together a plan to get her killed, first by recording her multiple affairs, including the likes of Cotton Weary and Billy Loomis's father, before showing the latter footage to Billy, who he then guided towards killing Maureen. And now, Roman looks to kill Sidney as well, so he can paint her as the true villain, and take her place as a beloved hero and star. Before he does that though, he drags in a tied up Milton, and slashes his throat for what he put their mother through. And once having done that, he shoots Sidney twice, once in the stomach, and once in the chest. Sidney though had been wearing a bulletproof vest, so as Ronan prepares to go kill the remaining 3 survivors, she shockingly appears behind and stabs him in the back twice, before landing one last stab through his chest, just as Dewey and Gale manage to break into the room. Roman's not yet dead though, since he'd also been wearing a bulletproof vest, but he's quickly put down with a headshot from Dewey, and with their Ghostface troubles appearing to finally be over, Gale and Dewey, along with Kincaid, head back to Northern California with Sidney. And there, Dewey, although recognizing their differences, decides to propose to Gale, and she says yes. 11 years on from this proposal, we see a married Gale and Dewey are still going strong, now settled down in Woodsboro where Dewey has been made sheriff. But living in a small town does still seem to be taking a toll on Gale, who struggles to think of what to write a new book about. While Sidney, on the other hand, has recently written a book of her own titled Out of Darkness, which discusses her road to a new life following everything that took place from 1996 to 2000, and she now returns to Woodsboro for the final stop of her book tour. The night prior to her arrival though, a new Ghostface had also arrived in town and began another killing spree by murdering 2 Woodsboro High School students, Marnie Cooper and Jenny Randall, whose deaths Dewey and Deputy Judy Hicks learn about the next morning. And they also tracked the phone used during the murders to the location of Sidney's book signing, with it being found inside the trunk of her rental car surrounded by blood. So as a result of this, Dewey places 24-hour police protection around Sidney until they can find the killer, who it appears has also directed their attention towards Sidney's estranged cousin Jill Roberts, who we met earlier along with her friends Olivia Morris, Kirby Reed, Robbie Mercer, and Charlie Walker, the latter 3 of whom are all movie nerds while at school, prior to which she'd received a phone call from Ghostface. So Sidney stays with Jill and her mother Kate, Maureen's sister, where she's barely able to get a moment of peace before Ghostface strikes once again, with him calling Jill, who's currently hanging out with Kirby, from her cheater ex-boyfriend Trevor Sheldon's phone, before revealing they're inside Olivia's closet, who lives right across the street, and forcing them to watch from their window as they stab her to death. With the Ghostface murders continuing to pile up, Gale decides to try and track them down herself, starting at the Stabathon event taking place that night, which she sneaks into to plant some cameras in case the killer shows up. But as she's setting up, Ghostface suddenly appears behind and attacks her, though they're only able to land a stab through her shoulder before being forced to run off by Dewey, who'd been called in by Gale earlier. Following their exit from the event, Ghostface then heads over to Robert's home, where they promptly killed the 2 deputies watching over Sidney, Deputy Perkins and Deputy Haas, before then calling her up and threatening to kill her family next. So she, along with Kate, prepares to head over to Kirby's house, where Jill is currently hanging out with her, Robbie, and Charlie. But they're instead met at the door by Ghostface, who they attempt to close it on, but the killer manages to land a stab through Kate's back through the mail slot, killing her. So Sidney runs out the back door to go protect Jill. Jill, Kirby, Robbie, and Charlie are then also met at the house by Trevor, who claims Jill texted him to come over, but she denies this being true since she doesn't even know where her phone is, and she gets up to look for it, prompting Trevor to follow after her. Robbie then also exits the room so Charlie can attempt to hook up with Kirby, who'd shut him down basically every previous attempt he's made, but she actually seems into it now and leans in for a kiss. But just then, they're interrupted by Trevor re-entering the room, so Charlie gets up and leaves. Robbie, meanwhile, is the next to be killed by Ghostface, who shows up in the backyard and stabs him to death just before Sidney arrives at the home. And once she's met up with Jill and Kirby, the killer rushes towards and chases them upstairs, where Sid's able to hide Jill under the bed before heading outside through the window and calling Dewey for backup. She then reunites with Kirby downstairs and they head down to the basement, where they see Charlie tied up in the backyard. So Kirby rushes outside to help him while Sidney goes back upstairs to check on Jill. But once he's untied, he stabs Kirby in the stomach twice, revealing himself to be Ghostface. He He then catches up to Sydney upstairs, but she manages to thwart his attack before suddenly being stabbed by the other Ghostface, Jill. With their identities revealed, the two explain that they decided to don the mask so they could fabricate and become famous off their survival, calling themselves the new Sid and Randy. And to finish off their plan, they look to pin it all on Trevor, who Charlie drags out of the closet so Jill can shoot him in the nuts and the head, before next preparing to stab one another just like Billy and Stu did. But once handed the knife, Jill stabs Charlie through the heart, as she plans to pin the murders on him as well. She then stabs Sydney in the stomach so she can begin setting up the scene of the crime for when the authorities arrive, with her pulling out some of her own hair with Trevor's hand and stabbing herself in the shoulder, and this works in making people believe her fabricated story. Things become a bit complicated though when, while recovering in the hospital, she learns from Dewey that Sydney survived the attack. So once the coast is clear, she heads over to Sid's room and relentlessly beats her, and the commotion prompts Dewey to enter as well, but she's able to knock him out with a bedpan. Gail, who had been recovering from the stab she took earlier, then also enters, so Jill aims Dewey's gun at her, but before she can fire, Sydney pops back to her feet and fries her brain with the defibrillators, which appears to take her out. While they're checking on Dewey though, Jill regains consciousness and prepares to stab Sid with a glass shard, but Sydney stops her in her tracks with a gunshot through the heart that kills her. With her death, Ghostface doesn't make a return to Woodsboro for another 10 years until 2021, when Woodsboro High School student Tara Carpenter receives a call from yet another new incarnation of the masked killer, who then texts her from her best friend Amber Freeman's phone, threatening to kill her if Tara is unable to answer a series of horror questions related to the Stab franchise, which now consists of 8 films that have gradually decreased in quality over time. And although Tara's never seen any of these films, she's able to answer the first couple questions correctly by looking up the cast online. When asked who the killer was in the first stab though, she only answers Billy Loomis, so since it was actually both Billy and Stu Macher, her answer is deemed incorrect, and Ghostface prepares to attack Amber. So Tara rushes out of the house to try and save her friend, but upon opening the door, she's instead met by Ghostface, who slashes her stomach, slams her to the ground, and stomps on her ankle, breaking it, before then landing a stab through her hand and multiple stabs through her back just as the cops arrive outside. Fortunately though, Tara survives the attack and is recovering in the hospital, where she's met and comforted the next day by her friends, including the son of the now Sheriff Judy Hicks, Wes Hicks, the niece and nephew of Randy Meeks, twins Mindy and Chad Meeks Martin, and Amber. She's also later joined by her estranged sister Sam, who's driven over from Modesto along with her boyfriend Richie Kirsch, and the two sisters are able to get some time alone for the first time in a long time, with Sam even staying with her through the night, in the middle of which, while in the break room taking her antipsychotic pills, Sam sees a hallucination of Billy Loomis, who hints that she may know why this new Ghostface is targeting her sister. Before we can learn what that reason may be though, Sam receives a phone call from the killer who claims to know her little family's secret, before then suddenly popping up behind and attacking her, but she's able to make it to a security guard before they can harm her, forcing them to exit. With the killer aware of the truth though, Sam now reveals it to Tara, explaining that one day when she was 13 and Tara was 8, she was looking through these boxes their mother kept in the attic in hopes of finding some Christmas presents, but she instead stumbled upon one of her mom's old diaries, inside of which she learned that Tara's father wasn't actually her own, since their mom had cheated on him in high school with Billy Loomis, who's Sam's actual father. So upon learning this, Sam confronted her mother about her lies, which unintentionally revealed the truth to their father, who left them that night as a result. Her mother then made her promise to never tell Tara about this, hence why Sam became so distant from her as they got older. And this also led to Sam's drug addiction, which she was eventually able to pull herself out of before leaving town altogether. All this being dropped on Tara at once though reasonably angers her, and she shouts at Sam to leave. So she does and is met outside by Richie, who'd heard everything from behind the door, but he isn't scared of her dark history and refuses to leave her side, so they plan their next move together, that being to meet with a now retired and no longer married Dewey, since he and Gail had split about 2 years ago, not too long after deciding to leave Woodsboro, as he struggled to live comfortably anywhere else. He's reluctant to speak with them at first, but after learning that Sam's Billy's daughter, he gives them 2 minutes, during which he suggests they first begin looking for the killer within Tara's friend group. He refuses to help them do it though, having suffered too many injuries from his previous encounters with the masked killers, but the discussion does prompt him to reach out to some old friends, with him first calling up Sydney, who's now married to Mark Kincaid, with whom she has 3 children, and warning her not to come back to Woodsboro no matter what she sees on the news, as there's a new Ghostface in town, and she warns him to be safe in return. He then goes to call Gail, but can't bring himself to speak with her, so he just sends her a text before deciding to leave his trailer park and help Sam and Richie as they round up the kids at Chad and Mindy's house, where Dewey reunites with Randy's little sister Martha, the twins' mother, and who we were introduced to back in 2000. Here we learn that along with Chad, Mindy, and Sam, the new Ghostface's most recent victim, Vince Schneider, who we met earlier while the kids were at school before he was killed at a bar later that night. and who Chad's current girlfriend, Liv McKenzie, explains she'd hooked up with over the summer, is also related to someone involved in the 1996 Woodsboro murders, as he was the son of Stu Macher's sister. And this revelation brings Mindy to the realization that the killer is making their own requel, and that they're likely a diehard Stab fan looking to rectify the poor decisions made in the recently released Stab 8. Moving on to later that day though, as Ghostface turns their attention to Sheriff Hicks, who receives a call just moments after leaving Wes home alone, in which the killer threatens to kill her son. So she turns the car around and rushes back to the house, where she's promptly met by Ghostface, who shocks her with a stab to the stomach before repeatedly stabbing her to death. And they then sneak their way into the home to attack Wes, who tries to hold them off but is ultimately stabbed through the neck and killed as well, with officers unfortunately only arriving after the fact, along with Dewey, who's met at the scene of the crime by a returning Gale, there to check on him as well as cover the story for her show. And here the two get to share a long-needed heart-to-heart, in which they make it clear that they still love each other very much, but just can't shake their clear differences. Sam soon also shows up on the scene, and after seeing the officers that were assigned to watch over Tara there as well, she realizes she must be in trouble. So she, joined by Dewey, rushes over to the hospital, where Tara's also begun to realize she may be in danger. So she tries as best she could to wheel herself out of there, and on her way out, she comes across a dead security guard, prompting her to hide in a closet, where she's soon found by Richie, who claims Sam asked him to come check on her, before he's then attacked by Ghostface, who slashes his arm and knocks him out, before turning their attention to Tara. Fortunately though, Dewey and Sam arrive just then, and as she grabs Tara and Richie, Dewey engages in a brawl with the killer, which he eventually brings to an end after landing multiple gunshots to their chest. Once in the elevator though, he realizes that if he wants to put the killer down for good, he needs to shoot them in the head, so he sends them down while he goes to finish the job. But the moment he aims his gun, he receives a call from Gale, which distracts him for a moment and allows the killer to pop back up and stab him in the stomach and through the back, killing him. As a result of his death, Sidney decides to once again return to Woodsboro and help a distraught Gale and the others kill another Ghostface. But Sam instead actually wants to just leave town with Tara and Richie, which Sidney tries to warn her against, claiming that no matter where she goes, the killer won't be too far behind. But she's willing to take that chance and drives off. Unbeknownst to her though, Sidney had put a tracker on her car, so she and Gale watch as their planned route is soon changed when Tara realizes she'd forgotten her inhaler. So they go grab her backup one from Amber's house, where a party in Wes's memory is currently taking place. There isn't too much action taking place there though, specifically between Liv and Chad, as the latter turns down her sexual advances since he's not 100% sure she's not the killer, which pisses her off and prompts her to storm out. As more time passes though, and after she doesn't respond to his multiple texts, he starts to become worried, so he heads outside to look for her, leaving himself vulnerable to an attack from Ghostface, who stabs him in the leg, and as he tries to run away, tackles him to the ground while landing multiple stabs to the back. Immediately following this attack, Sam, Richie, and Tara arrive at the house, so Amber shuts down the party and takes Tara upstairs to give her the inhaler, while Richie heads downstairs to grab a beer. And while they're all separated, Sam receives a call from Sidney, who informs her that the house she's inside of is actually Stu Macher's old home. And following this revelation, Ghostface shows up once again, appearing behind Mindy, who's still watching the first Stab movie on the couch and stabbing her in the shoulder. As she falls unconscious, Sam, Amber, Tara, Richie, and Liv all enter the room, and they all suspect Liv's the killer, since she has blood on her hands, but she's soon revealed not to be when she's shot in the head by Amber, which prompts Sam and Richie to run downstairs, leaving Tara alone with the killer. Sam quickly realizes this, so she tries to run back upstairs to protect her, but Richie warns her not to, citing how there's always two killers, and that he believes Tara must be the second. But Sam refuses to believe this and heads back up without him. While Sid and Gale finally make it to the house, outside of which Gale's promptly shot in the stomach by Amber, leaving Sid to enter alone. So once inside, she just starts shooting every door in sight, which results in her inadvertently shooting Richie in the leg, before Ghostface appears and sends her as well as themselves falling over the railing, resulting in the killer dropping their gun. So Sam swoops in to pick it up, but it's quickly taken from her by Richie as he stabs her in the gut, revealing himself as the other Ghostface. Amber then grabs Gale from outside, and the two explain how they're actually diehard Stab fans, just as Mindy suspected earlier, looking to give the writers some new source material centered around Sam, the illegitimate daughter of the original killer, as the villain, and the return and demise of the three legacy characters. So having revealed their motive, they stab Sidney in the stomach and prepare to stage the bodies. But when Amber goes upstairs to grab Tara, she's nowhere to be found, since Sam had found her earlier and untied her, which now allows her to suddenly appear around a corner and beat Amber with one of her crutches, distracting Richie for a moment and allowing Sam to tackle him to the ground before making a run for it. So he looks throughout the house for her while Amber, after knocking out Tara, battles Sid and Gale, whom she maintains control against for the most part, until Gale gets hold of her gun and shoots her 3 times, resulting in her falling against the accidentally turned on stove and being set on fire. Richie, meanwhile, gets ambushed by Sam, but he's able to regain control after tackling her down the stairs, although not for long, as she sees another hallucination of her father in the mirror, pointing her towards a knife on the floor, which she picks up and stabs Richie repeatedly with before slashing his throat. The day's not yet saved though, as after Sam reunites with Sid and Gale, a charred up Amber rushes towards them with a knife, but she's quickly put down by a headshot from Tara. Along with Sid, Gale, Sam, and Tara, we see that Chad and Mindy had also survived their attacks, as they're taken away in ambulances. And after thanking the two legacy characters for their help, Sam leaves in an ambulance as well with Tara. And that was everything you needed to know before watching Scream 6. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful in any way, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And also let us know in the comments below which Scream movie is your favorite. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.